I have been dealing with 2 days of physically moving from one apartment to the next. Luckily not.
Sorry, moving is just, it's a lot.
Many people will say like, oh, moving sucks. It does, right? As you said, it's one of the most stressful things. And I also acknowledge that there are potentially conflicting emotions that exist all at the same time. And it becomes an excellent opportunity to practice allowing myself to live in a complicated emotional place.
We all feel this in different moments in our lives, different moments every day, really, where we have not only multiple, but maybe even multiple to the point of conflicting emotions. And what do we do with those? Did I just choose the simplified label? Might there be more? Not one emotion, not one label defines us.
Is this really how am I feeling about this? It's not quite that. And then you become like a chef of your own emotions, like start to taste test different ones to actually say, oh, it's this and this and this. And
literally, I'm just blown by how you took it from moving and you took us elsewhere. That was good.
Welcome to Simply Enough. This is Zachary and Elizabeth, and thanks for tuning in.
If you're liking our podcast, we'd love it if you'd share with your friends and family.
And then rate and review to raise our visibility and spread the message of enoughness.
We love you. And remember, you are simply enough.
Just as you are.
Period.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Simply Enough. I'm Mr. Zachary Leonard.
And I'm Dr. Elizabeth Ignacio.
Listeners, and Dr. Ignacio, you're going to have to forgive me if I am just a little bit off in our episode today. I have been dealing with 2 days of physically moving from one apartment to the next. Luckily not.
Sorry. Moving is just, it's a lot. Sorry.
It is. And, it doesn't matter if it's like a floor above, a floor below, or like across the world. Like there's just, moving is a thing. It's a mindset. It's a physicality.
It's a thing. You're right.
So if I stumble or flubber or just like fail to put out a simple declarative sentence, bear with me. And actually, I'm going to use that as our theme for today, because I want to talk a little bit about what moving is like for me. And you did it. I think for many of us, moving is like, oh, right? Moving is just.
Yeah. And truth be told, actually, there was a study relative to, or multiple studies now at this point, relative to stressful events in life. And then, of course, there are, the obvious that were listed in, in the top 10 list, if you will. And of course, it's, sadly, death of a child, divorce, illness, job loss, but actually moving is in that list in terms of big life events associated with stress. So just validating how you're feeling, love, because ugh. Sorry, go on.
You do. And I would say I have an interesting perspective on moving, which I want to share. But before we go into that, one of the things that I realized about moving, that is something I hadn't realized before. The other night when you kind of, you're packing up boxes and you're doing all the things, and then you just hit a wall, right? That expression of just hitting a wall, right? Yeah. And you kind of are just like zombie-like, where you're just staring at all your stuff and you don't realize that you've been doing it for 20 minutes. You're just like staring and like maybe drool's coming out of your mouth. You know what I'm talking about, right? You're just like
talking to yourself, mumbling.
Exactly. So I realized one of the reasons for me why I get to that place is because when you're packing, everything is a decision, right? Where you're going to put something, what box does it need to go into, how that box is going to be packaged so that is it going to be labeled? And then where do you want it to go in the truck or wherever it's going to be moved? Everything is a mental decision in addition to all the physical side and the emotional side of moving. And that is just mentally taxing, right? And I hadn't really thought about the mental gymnastics that occur when you go through moving, on top of like finding a place and finances and location, et cetera, et cetera. So that was a key realization where I don't want to say just give myself a little bit of a mental hug, be like, every time you pick up something, you have to decide where it's going to go. You have to decide what it belongs with. You're going to have to decide how to label that box. And, I don't know if this happens to you guys, but I always believe, I'm going to remember exactly where I put this. You know what I mean? And then the 47 boxes later, I'm like, I have no idea where the shower curtain is.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? And I know I
Totally.
didn't label it, but anyway. So what I share with you guys today is just my perspective on moving. Many people will say like, oh, moving sucks, right? And it does, right? As you said, it's one of the most stressful things. And I also acknowledge that it's a complicated emotional process for me.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is I recognize that there are potentially conflicting emotions that exist all at the same time. And
Mm.
it becomes, I think, an excellent opportunity for me to practice allowing myself to live in a complicated emotional place. Okay. And let me give you an example of what I mean by that. Our current apartment or our apartment that we used to live in was brand new. I think it was like 5 years old. Okay. So, nice countertops in the kitchen and brand new wood floors and pocket recessed lighting and just some really nice bells and whistles that we think of, storage in the basement. Okay.
Mm.
The new apartment that we're living in is an older Chicago townhouse style. So it's got the creaky floors and, all the trim work is woodwork. And there's a built-in cabinet that's got like, the glass inlay and kind of the notch that you turn to open it. And the floor slants a little bit and like, very, very different. It would be easy, I think, for any of us. And I have to recognize and catch myself doing this. I will sometimes say, oh, our old apartment had this, but our new apartment has this. And what I meant earlier about living in a complicated emotional place is I recognize that but actually does a disservice to the very real feeling that I have in some ways about sadness or joy or appreciation or gratitude for what I had before. And then a different emotion about what I'm going to, as if I have to either balance them out or push myself away from one of those feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So I share that with
And
you
it makes sense because we all feel this, in different moments in our lives, different moments every day, really, quite likely, where we have not only multiple, but maybe even multiple to the point of conflicting emotions. Yeah. And what do we do with those?
Yes. And I find that the word but shows up often. And I really challenge myself not to use that word. So for moving, an example, our old place had 2 bedrooms, but our new place has a nice deck where we can sit outside. I actively work to take that out and you put in the word and, because when I put in the word and, I'm allowing whatever I'm feeling about the two bathrooms, let's say, to be present and to live and to not dismiss it by saying, oh, I have to get over it, so to speak, by recognizing that there's something else. No, I can live in a kind of a conflicted emotional place of, being bummed about losing another bathroom. And also being excited about.
That's a big deal, by the way.
It is a big deal.
Sorry, go ahead.
You know what I'm saying? So, and I think this can happen when any type of transition in one's life, or anytime, somebody, maybe you have a different job, or even if it's not, you're going from one thing to the next. The idea of living in a place where there's a melange of feelings and how we allow them to coexist. I would challenge you, listeners, to notice those times when you use but, and to give yourself an opportunity to see what that but means, and maybe consider taking it out and replacing it with and, to give yourself space to let the complicated emotions exist at the same time, rather than trying to like maybe push one away or lessen its impact on you to override some other feeling.
I am totally like being hit by so much of what you said. First, on the lightest note, I can't help but think of there's a lyric in your favorite musical, my friend. I believe one of your favorites, Into the Woods,
yes,
where Cinderella sings. Oh no, I'm sorry. The baker's wife, the lead, says, "Is it always either or? Is it never and?" And that's exactly what you're talking about in terms of, why does one have to choose? Why does one have to label either or? The and allows coexistence. So that's one just thing that hit me as you were saying that. I can actually hear Sarah Bareilles' voice in my head right now, because she just recently played and was nominated for a Tony for her role as Baker's wife. And I can just hear her voice right now singing, is it always either or? Is it never and?
Yes.
It also makes me think of, oh, my heart. It also makes me think of my daughter just last year. Here we are a year later, in her moving to her college, to be a first year in college, and it's thousands of miles away. And I posted all about it in my generation's thing, which is Facebook. I'm still learning Instagram. But it's funny that a lot of people, a lot of adults have actually commented on that one series of posts around the time of my daughter graduating. And I'm gearing up because my son is a senior in high school, a rising senior in high school. So I'm going to have to go through all of those emotions once again. And one of the things that was most commented on, of those posts that were most commented on, one of the things that I wrote was the privilege of heartbreak, because what I wrote about was, oh my gosh, it was gut wrenching. I like the sadness that I felt, leading up to the moving her in, the sadness and heartbreak that I felt that day, as I was hugging her and saying goodbye, and I like watched her walk away from me. Look, I'm getting teary eyed already.
You are.
And especially knowing that like I'm going to go through this with my son, but, and yet what I wrote also about that sadness is that it wasn't just steeped in sadness, though I didn't deny how heartbreaking it was. I also recognize, and I have such pride and joy and excitement, and I wouldn't want it to be any different for her or for me. So that is the privilege of heartbreak, of feeling both. One emotion feels powerfully because of the other. I wouldn't be so, if I wasn't so happy for her and excited for her and proud of her and proud of, the 17 and a half years that led up to that point, I wouldn't be as sad either. It's because of both coexisting that makes both emotions that much more meaningful. It's kind of like, one of the best things to do to heighten a chocolate flavor is add the bitterness of coffee. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit of that actually, not only is it okay for, emotions to coexist, they actually can potentiate each other or be the reason for each other. So it's hard to have one without the other. The other thing, speaking of my daughter, is, damn it, I hate it when she's right, and she has to teach me something. So along the same lines of, her graduating. So she graduated from high school at the end of 2022. That was right around when people, governments, cities, counties were starting to feel a bit like, oh, we're, now in the post-COVID era. And so, things were a little bit more in flux in terms of mask wearing and the need for, indoor versus outdoor celebrations and all that kind of thing. But they're right around like a week before her graduation, there was a COVID surge of, I forget what variant at that point, Delta, I can't even keep track anymore. But I mean, it was very clear here in Hawaii. It was a very swift and undeniable peak. So it was clearly a surge. And so there was debate, though not mandated, in terms of, crowds for the graduation ceremony. And here in Hawaii, graduation, the big deal isn't actually just the graduation ceremony itself of getting the diploma. It's really after the fact, where literally, hundreds of friends and family gather and give leis to the point where you can't see or breathe because the leis are so high up your face. You can only see, your forehead. So it's it's a big deal, in terms of crowd gathering and everything like that. And I also have a nephew who is my daughter's classmate. It's the same age as my daughter, and they go to the same school. And so obviously it's a great family event. And my parents, who are in their 80s, were very excited to come. But then the surge came. And so, we had a discussion about whether or not my parents in their 80s, would come to the ceremony. And we ultimately decided that the prudent thing was that it was being live streamed anyway, that the prudent thing and more comfortable for them is just for them to not come to the actual ceremony and watch it on live stream. And, that was a unanimous decision, and really quite a quick and clear decision amongst the family. And later that day, Gracie, I had found out that, she, was really sad and she was, tearful and, just kind of reticent and quiet. And I took it wrongly. I admit I took it as that she was pouting, that she was, selfishly pouting that, her Lolo and Lola, which is Filipino for grandma and grandpa, my parents, that Lolo and Lola couldn't be there. And so I actually chastised her. And I said, Gracie, don't be so selfish that you want Lolo and Lola there. This is the right thing. And you should, and you know how I hate that word should is shit, but I used it. I said, and you should, be supportive and be happy that Lolo and Lola will be comfortable and not come. And she, with tears in her eyes, looked up at me and with no attitude whatsoever. So this wasn't like a snarky comeback. She literally looked at me with very sincere look on her face. And she looked at me and she said, Mom, I can be very supportive and sad about the fact that Lola and Lola can't come. I had nothing to say other than after a moment of silence, I said, you're absolutely right. You are allowed to feel both. And quite frankly, how could you not feel both? And even more so, you feel both for the same reason. You are protective of them. And so you feel sure and confident and good about the decision of saying, no, Lolo and Lola don't come. But it's because you're protective of them and you care about them and you love them so much that you wanted them there for graduation. And so you're sad that they're not going to be there. Of course you feel both.
Man,
Mic effing drop by my not even graduated yet daughter.
She dropped it from like the 9th floor. And
totally.
Boom.
Pretty sure it hit on my head. I mean, but she's right? That's exactly what you're talking about in terms of not only is it okay to have mixed feelings, often the mixed feelings are because of each other and they potentiate the presence of each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would add to that. So I learned from an awesome mentor teacher when I was a young up and coming student teacher. And one of the things that I learned, I also want to put out there that is so incredible. And actually, Elizabeth, I don't know that you do this sometimes. So I noticed when she was working with a student who was having some kind of emotional expression, and I say that open-endedly, could be what we would perceive as joy, could be perceived as sadness, whatever. Her question was never, how are you feeling? Her question was, tell me all of your feelings. Or what are you feeling? Now, often they would say, oh, I'm sad or I'm happy, like a singular feeling. And then she would pause and then she would say, what else are you feeling? Later, I asked her, I'm like, why? Just curious, right? Why do you ask the question that way? Tell me all of your feelings or what are you feeling versus how are you feeling? She goes, we rarely only feel one thing at a time. I was like, oh my God, she's absolutely right. And she was saying, because even like, let's say, and we talked about anger in a previous episode, but even taking anger, is a complicated feeling, right? There's some tangents on there, some little, freckles of other feelings as well.
Absolutely.
Joy, there's some tangential feelings there too. It is rare. And she was absolutely right. And to Gracie's point, that we rarely feel one thing at a time. And your point, which you explained so awesomely, and I think that the idea of coffee with chocolate is spot on, because feelings do, what did you say, potentiate each other.
Mm-hmm.
And if we give ourselves that grace, if we give ourselves that permission, we then, I believe, start to avoid shoulds, right? Because should, in some ways, forces us down a singular emotional track. Well, I should be happy about moving. I should be sad about my child graduating. I should be this. And if we should ourselves into one feeling, we miss the potential that we actually feel lots of different feelings. And that's okay. And not only is it okay, but it's very natural. It's very human. And it's where me live pretty much all the time. So it also gives us tremendous space to just be ourselves.
That's like Brene Brown. And I think everybody now is aware of who Brene Brown is and her work on vulnerability and shame. But like, that was her latest book. And, for those who don't like to read, I think it's a Netflix special now, but it's based on her latest book is called The Atlas of the Heart. It's a BMF of a book, very research based, very data based. And it's about the naming of the emotions. And one of the biggest cruxes, if you will, of her seminal work for the Atlas of the Heart is, having done research and studies and surveys on people, people can pretty much only come up with 3 emotions. 2 of the 3 are negative, actually. So like there's happy, and then I think there's like mad and scared or something like that. So of the 3 emotions, I can't remember exactly what they were. Only 1 was happy and the other 2 were negative. Okay. But what she pulled apart and this work that she did going into Atlas of the Heart in naming emotions is there's actually like 87 emotions or something along those lines. And the subtle nuances to name the emotions really matter, because that way you can be that much more mindful, aware, objective of what you're feeling. And then in doing so, that's how one can self-regulate, because they realize, oh, when I'm feeling my body like this, that's because I'm feeling frustrated, which is ever so slightly different than when I'm feeling anger, or do you know what I mean? Or fear into, all kinds of stuff. So it's multifaceted, but you can name each facet. And by naming each facet, you can kind of have a bit more ownership of it, without shame, have a little bit more ownership. Once you can name it and label it, that's how you can move through it and even grow through it. And then in the future, especially if they're negative emotions, not necessarily dwell and live and abide in them as long as we might have dwelled and lived and abided in those emotions in the past.
I was smiling as you were talking about this, because when getting back to education, that teacher that I was just speaking about also had an emotions chart. And that emotions chart, I would say, for first graders, did a pretty fantastic job at exactly what you're talking about. And she would encourage them to think about the nuances between anxious and afraid, or nervous and scared, or whatever it was. And then the other thing that she added was just a benefit of like 30 seconds or a minute. Okay, go point to tell me what you're feeling, right? And then a couple, and then take a break, and then now tell me what you're feeling. And the second time around, often the answer would change. And she found that the answer was more spot on the second time, because actually sitting in the place of like labeling it, let's say afraid, the student would come back and be like, I'm not actually afraid. I'm anxious. I'm anxious to go to PE because I know we're playing this game and I don't get picked and blah, 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 like something like along those lines. So the child that would do kind of a knee jerk, the top 5 feelings, like that, what you were talking about, the ones that they hear all the time.
Yes.
But then just sitting in it for just a little bit was actually they were able to fine tune it a little bit more. And I found that to be true for myself as well. Just like, am I really this? Is this really how am I feeling about this? And I'm like, it's not quite that. And then you become like a chef of your own emotions. Like you start to taste test different ones to actually come through and say, oh, it's this and this and this and this. And then you can pick apart all the different, the different feelings that you're having at the same time. But I found the addition of time also helps get into the nuances of those feelings so that you can really label it that in a way that feels right and appropriate.
And in asking others to do that for themselves, I think for those of us who are, in vocations that deal with other people, whether it's myself with patients or whether it's with teachers and students, it behooves us. It's a part of our responsibility to self-check what emotion or the label of emotion that we are projecting onto somebody else. Whether it's a patient is very short with me and seems, upset. And so now I'm labeling that person is mad at me, that person is angry at me, or that person is, condescending towards me, but then actually peel apart, no, that patient is afraid, that patient, is in pain, that patient has, that kind of thing really helps see the shared humanity in every situation, and that's where empathy comes from. I say that also, if I may, with humility and gratitude, but if I may, that's a big responsibility of teachers on youth in not being so quick to say that's an angry child, or that's a sullen child, or that's a whatever simplified reductive uni label. Like that child is one person, that person is one person, forgive me, but that person is one emotion, one pattern of behavior. Perhaps peel away and say, did I come to that conclusion in a simplified, did I just choose the simplified label? Might there be more?
I did exactly what you were talking about this morning. And I'm going to throw this out there. In the moving, it was a stressful time this morning. Let me say it's been a stressful 72 hours. When we showed up at our new apartment, of course it's street cleaning day. It happens once a month. So that means that all the cars on one side of the street have to move to the other side, and you can't park on the one side of the street because the street sweeper is going to come and you can't come from 9 to 12 or 9 to 2. Okay. Well, we have this 20-foot truck, right? That truck's got to go somewhere, and now we can't park. And so in addition to everything else that we were battling yesterday, and now with the truck, my husband calls and he's like, where do I park? Okay. And we've got people helping us, and et cetera. So these questions are coming at me, right? Where do we park? We can't park in the alley. We can't do this. And there was traffic and there was this. And so eventually, like, we kind of had a moment, and I said, it seems like you're mad at me. Right. And I was not only taking all of that emotion that was, I felt, directed at me, which was okay. That was how I was, that was what I was feeling about all of that. But I was then giving it a label and giving it back to him rather than just asking, tell me what you're feeling right now, and being in that place. So I did exactly what you said. You cautioned us away from this morning, just very, very simply. I not only named his emotion, which is his right to do, but then I also took it on as if it was at me, when in fact it wasn't. It was just his emotional place. So I give that to you. Just say, that happened very much this morning, and I get to go back to him and say, I realize now how I could have done that differently. Could have gone back to Christy Breed and just said, tell me what you're feeling. Tell me all your feelings. There is a practice in education that I worked very hard against, and it was the practice of the previous year's teachers meeting with the next year's teachers to talk about children. This is a very common practice in education, and I'm sure it may happen in other industries as well. I don't want to presume, but I'm just going to say I know for a fact that this is done with good intention. It's done with good intention to help prepare or ease a transition, or to just ensure that there is a shared knowledge base that will make truly at its core, students be successful and the teachers be successful in supporting the students. I found that those conversations have evolved to the point to be exactly what you're talking about, where they become the application of a singular label on a child. And not only do I find that wrong, but then I find that then gets passed from one teacher to another teacher. And then that is now the label by which that teacher sees that child. And the child almost has to work
without having even had the child yet.
Yes, correct.
So it's a preconceived notion, but because it's been passed on by a esteemed, trusted colleague, it's no longer a notion, it's truth. Perception is reality. So now it's a preconceived label that is believed to be truth.
You're absolutely right. These children often haven't even met their teachers yet. They don't get the privilege of giving their own first impression, right? It is now already in many ways done, decided, and that is the lens often by which these educators truly do see this child or these children. Why I think this is important to talk about today is we set up this episode really acknowledging that we are complex individuals with complex emotions. And more often than not, we are living in a complex emotional state, that we try to singularly define our emotional states when in fact that does a disservice to all of the emotions that we're experiencing and the value of recognizing all of them. Now, we may not want to live in them, but at least acknowledging them by using and instead of but allows us to see ourselves and our places as emotional states. What a tremendous disservice we do to children. And it's not just children. I will say this happens, and I have a short example to this, but it happens all the time. But what a tremendous disservice we do to children if we do not see them equally complex and dynamic for the beautiful beings that they are, that we don't give them the opportunity to form their own impression with their teacher, this educator who's going to be a big part of their life for 8, 9, 10, 12 months, that we somehow now ask them to go through the hurdles of having to convince the teacher that that impression is wrong or live up to whatever standards, expectations is now imposed upon them if they have been given titles that make it sound like they're the glorified best child, right? Mm-hmm. Now, no matter what, they are not starting at their own starting mark. They are starting at somebody else's starting mark. And that is boldly unfair. In addition, it does a disservice to the teachers themselves because they then, I feel, fail to see themselves as complex individuals. They fail to see themselves as complex teachers who need to work with complex individuals, right? So that some days they may struggle. Some days they may be like just having a great time with their kids. Not every day has to be a day where the teachers are always perfect. Right? We've talked about perfection before. So the idea that a child can be singularly labeled is in some ways an acknowledgement they've accepted that they themselves can be singularly labeled. And that is not okay, as we've established. The reason why I say this, I feel like this, I know this doesn't happen in education, is how often are we with friends or with people and we drop a comment about somebody else like, oh, like she's the feisty one. Or we think about the Golden Girls, for example, and we go through all the different characters, like, Rose is the dimwit and Blanche is the harlot or the hoe, right? Or B is the uptight one, or, and then we create these characters as if we can really kind of capture them. And I know it's done for TV, but I can think of 3 conversations with friends where people have similarly labeled somebody by one term, and then the other person's like, oh, I don't know that person. And boom, now it's decided, right? We do that. We start with children. We do it to ourselves. And it's a self on self crime. And it's a self on another crime that I think just needs to stop, because we are complicated people and we need to just, I think one should accept and bask in the beauty of the complex emotional beings that we are.
And I so love that you brought up that whether one starts off and is bestowed with a negative label, oh, that's the bad kid, or even this is the model kid, this is my favorite child, you're gonna love her. That doesn't allow any room in either direction. That doesn't allow any room for life events, life circumstances, fluctuations, changes, natural emotions, fears, hopes. Like it's just as is any label. And, one of our very first episodes in Simply Enough, we talked about Kierkegaard and his statement about, when you label me, you reduce me, right? That's exactly what we're talking about in terms of being reductive to a singular label that doesn't allow room for anything. But who is that? Even if animals can display different emotions in different situations, how much more so we as complex, cognitive, emotional, physical, spiritual beings that we human beings are, how could we not have that of ourselves and expect that of other people? Plus, when we talk about shared experience and the common experience of humanity, it is actually how we can be a shared human experience because of the multiple complex emotions. Because while outward cheerleader, happiness kind of persona that some people have said, I just don't get you. Like, how can you be happy like that all the time? If you recognize also, oh, I have my moments of fear and anxiety and feeling blue, if you will. We all have that shared experience. And if we can give ourselves and each other that space and grace, that's how one can find connection, because not one emotion, not one label defines us.
Amen. Amen. So for all of you, if you are facing anything, a child about to graduate, you're moving, maybe you're starting something new, maybe it's just a day and you're reflecting on the day. It is a great opportunity to practice recognizing the complex emotions that you felt or feel about whatever it is you face, and give yourself room to say all of those feelings and to name them, to label them, and to recognize that that label is also fleeting. That doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be how you're going to feel the next day, nor is it going to be how you're going to feel about it an hour from now. Who knows? But to just give yourself that opportunity to recognize it and to use the word and, right, instead of but, so that you're not trying to talk yourself away from a feeling. You're not trying to talk yourself out of feeling something. And then to just be cognizant of the ways in which we apply those labels to others in particularly dangerous ways, specifically when we think about how we give these labels to children and what this means as they are formulating themselves, figuring out who they are and the hurdles that they have to overcome. See, I'm getting emotional about this now. The hurdles that they have to overcome when they are just growing and changing and evolving. I'm almost 42. I'm still growing and changing. And the application of a singular label on such a young and beautiful heart it's a crime. It's unfair. It's wrong. And it needs to stop. And what I would just invite anybody, look, I've done it too. So I'm also going to put that out there. I'm not, this is something I did and still work on. But I just invite all of us to give ourselves the permission to be complex emotional people with complex emotional feelings all at the same time, and then pass that grace on to others.
Because as much as, yes, absolutely, the children are impressionable, moldable, vulnerable. There are many, not many, all of us as adults have an inner child in us. So we have to apply that space and grace and allow that space and grace to ourselves as adults and even the inner child in the adults around us.
Amen. So, we don't really like to say homework, but hey, maybe today, listeners, some point this week, talk to your inner child and tell your inner child, hey, little Zachary, little Elizabeth, you are not just simply enough.
You are more than enough.
Just as you are.
Period.
Period.